We're here today. We're going to start Monster Hearts. Um, we did sort of look through um, before on another stream, but today will be the first sort of in-depth look. Monster Hearts 2 is intended for 3 to 5 players, and a session takes 2 to 4 hours. One of the players sitting down at the table takes on the role of the MC and plays by a different set of rules. You can choose to play this game as a one-shot or across a short campaign of several sessions. This game is queer, meaning that it pushes back against a heterosexist framework that underlies so many of our culture's stories. When you play, you contend with all the chaotic possibility and uncertainty of desire. I'm actually going to take the jacket off. It's a little bit distracting. It's very simple, elegant. Monster Hearts 2 is about the messy lives of teenagers who are secretly monsters. It explores the terror and confusion of having a body that is changing without your permission. The monstrosity of these characters is literal. They are vampires, werewolves, witches, and more, but their monstrosity is also allegorical, standing in for experiences of alienation, shame, queerness, and self-destruction. Aside from the MC, each player is in charge of creating and playing a single main character. Each of those main characters starts with a skin that defines what kind of monster they are. Skins are both literal and allegorical. The vampire is an actual vampire, an immortal being who drinks blood, but they are also a manipulative person who treats consent like a game. They're both things at once, and the ebb and flow between them will help define a character's story. Throughout the book, you will find a series of examples demonstrating the intricacies of the game. The first is below. The conversation. Monster Hearts. Oh, I guess I should say, I'm not going to read that example, but you can already see that's much better than any of the examples we saw in Lancer. A lot more defined, distinct, a lot more just inherent tensions that are set up within the group. Whereas Lancer just tells you, oh, yeah, you should do that on your own, and we're not giving you a framework for it. The conversation. Monster Hearts was built on the framework of another game, Apocalypse World by Vincent D. Baker and Megui Baker. Apocalypse World is about sexy badasses in the post-apocalypse community. It's worth getting your hands on. In its pages, the Bakers introduce the idea of the conversation. You probably know this already. Role-playing is a conversation. You and the other players go back and forth, talking about these fictional characters and their fictional circumstances, doing whatever it is that they do. Like any conversation, you take turns. But it's not like taking turns, right? Sometimes you talk over each other, interrupt, build on each other's ideas, monopolize, all fine. All these rules do is mediate the conversation. They kick in when someone says some particular things and they impose constraints on what everyone should say after. Makes sense, right? Monster Hearts is also a conversation. It meanders sometimes, but it goes somewhere. You build off the things that each other people say. Each player is in charge of one main character, what they think, say, and do. As those main characters live their lives, the players interact with rules that they help to sculpt the story as well to shake it up at key moments. The exception to all this is the MC, a player who fills a different role in the conversation. The MC is in charge of all the side characters as well as framing scenes and managing the setting. The MC has a different role, but it's not you against the MC, it's a conversation, and you're in it together. The agenda. Everyone at the table shares this four-part agenda. Make each main character's life not boring. Keep the story feral. Say what the rules demand. Say what honesty demands. This isn't a list that you need to memorize or check off. It's instead four ideas that reinforce one another and help communicate the spirit of the game. Make each main character's life not boring. As a player, part of your job is to advocate for your character. But being their advocate doesn't mean it's your job to keep them safe. It's not. It's your job to make their life not boring. It's about figuring out who they are, what they want, and what they'll do to get it, even if it exposes them to danger. Your character can't emerge triumphant if you aren't willing to see them through some shit. Unlike some role-playing games, Monster Hearts doesn't have an endgame or explicit goal for you to shoot for. You are left to determine what it is that your character wants and pursue that in any way that makes sense for you. Since the default setting is a high school, there are a few goals that nearly everyone is going to have: saving face, gaining friends, and social security. Figuring out who their enemies are, getting social leverage on others, dumping their pain on people. If you aren't sure who your character is, start with those things and build from there. Soon, you'll likely find yourself embroiled in situations that demand action, and what your character wants will emerge from that. Keep the story feral. The conversation that you have with other players and with the rules create a story that couldn't have existed in your head alone. As you play, you might feel an impulse to domesticate that story. You form an awesome plan for exactly what could happen next and where this story could go. In your head, it's spectacular. All you need to do is dictate what the other players should do, ignore the dice once or twice, and force your idea into existence. In short, you'd have to take control. The game loses its magic when any one player attempts to take control of the story. It becomes small enough to fit inside one person's head. The other players turn into audience members instead of participants. Nobody's experience is enriched when one person turns the collective conversation into their own private story. So avoid this impulse. Let the story's messy, chaotic momentum guide it forward in any given moment. Focusing on reacting to other players, allow others to foil your plans or improve upon them. Trust that story emerges from wildness. Play to find out what happens next. Let yourself be surprised. Say what the rules demand. The dice are there on purpose. They aren't for ambiance or as an obstacle to clear before getting to the real story. The rules for moves exist because constraints lead to creativity and chance leads to unexpected twists. You're supposed to fail times, sometimes you're supposed to be caught off guard. The rules will interrupt you, and thank goodness that they do. Every time you pick up the dice, you invite a little bit of the wild unknown into your story. You are taking all the plans that have been shaping up in your head, all the expectations you've attached to this moment, and are putting them at risk. The dice are there on purpose. They keep the story feral. When you say something that triggers a move, you follow through. When you pick up the dice, you invite them to change everything. Listen to them and say what the rules demand. Say what honesty demands. Cultivating an air of mystery can be fun, but it's important to communicate with your fellow players even if your character is doing their best to keep secrets. If people don't know what your character wants, what they're hiding, or who they really are, then it becomes hard to actually engage that character. Remember, this is a conversation. Actually saying the things you're thinking is important. If you want people to be able to respond to them, sometimes that means saying my character is furious, though he's doing his best to keep it suppressed. Sometimes it means saying, I think my character died down by the rail yard a year ago, but so far nobody knows she's a ghoul. They think she's still just Becky. Trust your fellow players and give them the information they need to tell a good story with you. Communicate what you're feeling and needing. If a scene is going down that you're not comfortable with, you have every right to say something. While it's important to say what the rules demand, it's also important to make sure we all feel safe and grounded when we play. MC. Another kind of honesty is demanded of you. When you give players information, be generous and helpful. When someone's fate is in your hands, be scrupulous, resist pettiness. Honor the strengths and resources of each character and don't play gotcha. At the same time, trust yourself to introduce real consequences. Be honest with those consequences too. Go for the throat when the moment demands it. Framing scenes. Play is divided into scenes just like in a movie or TV show, and just like in a movie or TV show, not every moment has to happen on screen. The MC and the players make decisions about what's important enough to show, when the scene should end, and what the group should skip to next. As you play, the MC will ask a lot of questions, and some of the answers will become the foundation for new scenes. The process of starting a new scene is called scene framing. Often it's a very simple process. After one scene ends, the MC can turn to a player and say something like, so, Amlin, while those two are fighting in the change room, where are you? The player who's playing Amlin can respond, then with action taking place in a new scene. I've ditched out of my next class and am walking through the mall. I think the plan is to steal something, maybe a handbag. The MC can respond by fleshing out the scene a bit more, describing the crowds in the mall itself, where the MC can ask questions about the topics, and Amlin's player can fill in those details, or another player can suggest that they're there too, and jump in with their character. The MC has authority over scene framing. This means that the MC is the one who ultimately decides where the next scene starts and what is happening. However, the MC is invited to share that authority and responsibility whenever doing so makes sense. If it's clear to the MC what the next moment of action or brooding gloom will be, they can dive into that scene. If it isn't clear, they can ask questions in order to give others an opportunity to introduce interesting situations. Moves and rolling. During scenes, you contribute to the conversation. Describe what your character is feeling. Say what they say. Describe their actions and how they move through their environment. It's fine to talk in first person. I squeeze between the two desks while muttering under my breath, or in third, Jane squeezes between two desks. Most people slip in and out of these different approaches organically and sometimes without even noticing. It's also fine to borrow narrative techniques from other mediums, perhaps describing how the camera pans across your bedroom as if it was a movie, or describing a character's internal monologue as though they were in a book. Sometimes you'll say something that triggers a move. Moves are rules for doing particular things, and many involve rolling the dice once they kick in. There are basic moves that each main character has. They turn someone on and lash out physically. There are also moves that are specific to each skin, like the vampire's feeding or werewolf's senses. When you narrate your character doing something described by a move, you follow the rules for that move. On the other hand, if you want the benefit of a certain move, you need to first describe your character taking appropriate action. Either way, you end up with rules and story inseparably entwined. Sometimes there isn't a right move. Sometimes you can't get what you want, at least not directly. Don't try to bend every situation to cram in moves. Sometimes the conversation is just a conversation. There are lots of things that can happen in this game without any moves being triggered. If you find yourself studying the list of basic moves to figure out which one fits the current situation, consider that it might not be any of them. That's totally fine. If a move involves rolling dice, it'll specify which of your four stats to use: hot, cold, volatile, or dark. Roll two dice and add your stat to the sum. If your hot is 2 and you're asked to roll with hot, then you roll 2 dice and add 2. If you roll a 3 and a 4, then your final total would be 9. A result of 10 or higher is good. A result to 7 to 9 is complicated. You might be asked to make some hard choices or pay a price, but you will probably still get what you want out of the deal. A 6 or less means you are unsuccessful, and the MC will likely introduce some unpleasant consequences. Moves emerge from the conversation, and the results of the move become part of it too. When something happens because of a move, make sure to go around the scene to how things have changed as a result. How do others feel about what just happened? How do they react? Who is caught off guard and who seizes a moment of opportunity? If someone just lashed out physically at your character, it might be tempting to automatically reach for the dice to lash out physically back. But the conversation isn't there just yet. We need to see how the outcomes of that first move play out, what the other characters actually think and do in response, even if only a moment passes in the action of the story. Moves and the MC. The MC doesn't play by the same set of rules as everyone else. Their side characters don't trigger moves and they don't roll dice. Instead, part of the MC's job is setting up situations that push the other players to make moves and roll dice. The MC role is explained in Chapter 4. Strings, which I haven't had any personal experience with this game. I have watched some, and most notably the Critical Role one-shot they did playing this, but I did watch some others, and I have to say, strings is my absolute favorite mechanic from this game, and it's something that I believe you could, maybe not necessarily should, but I believe there are a lot of games that or campaigns that you could introduce this mechanic and make uh, it a lot better. Uh, I believe you'll see why when we get into it. Strings represent the emotional power that you have over others. You gain strings on specific individuals and can then spend them as a sort of currency during interactions. With those individuals, strings can be earned by turning someone on, shutting someone down, or in ways specific to each skin. Strings are abstract, reflecting a general shift in power within a relationship. There is no specific response demanded when someone gains a string, other than playing your character with authenticity as power dynamics are shifting. There is a space to keep track of strings on the character sheet. The best way to use that space is to list the other characters, and then whenever you gain a string on one of them, draw a little circle next to their name. When you spend the string, fill in the circle. Whenever you spend a string, there should be something in the fiction to explain the effect. If you're adding a 1 to roll against them, what's causing the effect? You utter some snide remark that throws them off balance, or if you're tempting them to do your bidding, how do you use your emotional hold to do that? Do you dangle a secret in return for their obedience, or is it your seductive allure that draws them in? Sometimes it can help to think back to how you got the string in the first place. Strings are spent using the pulling strings basic move. Side characters can also gain strings on main characters. Here we have another little example. Turn someone on. When you turn someone on, roll with hot. On a 10 up, gain a string on them, and they choose a reaction from below. On a 7 to 9, they can either give you a string or choose one of the reactions. I give myself to you. I promise something I think you want. Or I get embarrassed and act awkward. All kinds of things can turn someone on, especially if that person is a teenager. Maybe this is a flirtatious glance, a whispered promise for later, or a goofy smile at the right moment. Maybe it's just something they notice about you as you walk past them in the hall. When you use this move, feel free to take the opportunity to step outside your character, to speak like an author would, describing your character's lips or silhouette. Unlike other basic moves, turning on can be triggered even if there's no specific action being taken. Your character doesn't have to intend to turn someone on. Sometimes it just happens. This move is at the heart of how Monster Hearts understands sexuality, especially teen sexuality. We don't get to decide what turns us on or who. Part of your agenda is keeping the story feral, and that means letting your character's sexuality emerge in all of its confusing and unexpected glory. When someone turns your character on, the emotional dynamic between them shifts. If a string is gained, the power dynamic shifts a little bit as well. How you react to that is up to you. What honesty demands is that you acknowledge the shift. Imagine what your character might be feeling and play it from there. If Julia turns Monique on, it doesn't mean Monique has to throw herself at her. Just play out how Monique would naturally respond. Maybe Monique blushes and turns to leave, or maybe she gets nervous and starts stammering. actually, how that's interesting. It only tells you on the 7 to 9. Oh, on a 10 up, gain a string. And they choose a reaction. Okay. Shut someone down. When you shut someone down, roll with cold. On a 10 up, choose one from below. On a 7 to 9, choose one from below, but you come across poorly and they give you a condition in return. They lose a string on you. If they have no strings on you, gain one on them. They gain a condition, or you take one forward, which I believe taking one forward is an advantage, a +1 or something on your next roll. Make this as a cruel remark in the locker room, a death threat, or an embarrassing prank pulled in front of the entire school. Shutting someone down is an attempt to take their power and confidence away, usually in front of an audience. The difference between the 10 result and the 7 to 9 is whether or not you manage to pull it off looking cool and suave, or tarnish your own reputation in the process. Conditions affect how your character is seen by others and are explained on 31. Taking one forward is a bonus to a future roll and is also explained on 31. Keep your cool. When you keep your cool and act despite fear, name what you're afraid of and roll with cold. On a 10 up, you keep your cool and gain insight. Ask the MC a question about the situation and take one forward to acting on that information. On a 7 to 9, the MC will tell you how your actions would leave you vulnerable, and you can choose to back down or go through with it. Charging into a building to save a loved one, shoplifting a handgun, or facing down a school bully, keeping your cool comes up when a character attempts to push past their fear and nerves in order to act. Acting is essential. Your character needs to be proactively doing something in the scary or tense situation before this move is triggered. The trigger for this move is admittedly one of the most subjective in the game. It's up for people at the table, but especially the MC and the active player, whether acting in a specific situation requires keeping your cool. When you ask the MC a question about the situation, the MC will answer truthfully and generously, even if it would require preternatural intuition for your character to figure out. The question could involve assessing risks. What's the biggest threat in the room? Uncovering true motivations. Why did Deirdre come here tonight? Or developing a better picture of the situation. Are there any other people in the house right now? Your question should pertain to the immediate situation, and the bonus you take forward should resolve within the next couple of scenes. Lash out physically. When you lash out physically, roll with volatile. On a 10 up, you deal them harm, and they choke up momentarily before they can react. On a 7 to 9, you harm them, but choose one. They learn something about your true nature and gain a string on you. The MC decides how bad the harm turns out, or you become your darkest self. Sure, we'll learn about darkest self later. It's you basically lose, at least from what I remember, you more or less lose control of your character until and what that looks like looks different for each skin, and I'm not sure how it resolves usually. But yeah, darkest self is not good. Maybe you're punching someone in the face or biting down with looping fangs. Maybe you're shoving your boyfriend angrily off of a second-story balcony. Lashing out physically is triggered when you attempt to do real harm to another person. It only applies when you're looking to actually rough someone up, which means that a threatening shove into a locker is better handled as shutting someone down. A few different moves in the game can lead a character to choke up momentarily. What this means varies depending on the context of the specific situation, but generally involves temporarily faltering or inability to act. It might mean a character going beet red and stuttering, experiencing a moment of panic-related blackout, or letting out a terrified scream and shielding themselves from further danger. The consequences vary situationally as well. This might be an embarrassing moment in which a character loses esteem or a dangerous opening for an enemy during a fist fight. Harm is just what it sounds like. It is explained more in detail on page 27. Run away. When you run away, roll with volatile. On a 10 up, you get away to a safe place. On a 7 to 9, you get away but choose 1. You run into something worse, you cause a big scene, or you leave something behind. When bullies have you cornered and you try to bolt for the door, or a strange wolf-like creature is chasing you down a woody path, you are running away. Coupled without lashing out physically, your volatile stat is all about fight or flight instincts. If you roll a 7 or 9 result and decide to leave something behind, the MC will tell you what. Though feel free to suggest something. Maybe it's your cell phone, full of private conversations and mischief potential. Maybe it's a science textbook you borrowed from a temperamental friend. Whatever it is, it's likely to cause problems sooner or later. Gaze into the abyss. When you gaze into the abyss, name what you're looking for and roll with dark. On a 10 up, the abyss shows you lucid visions, and you take one forward to addressing them. On a 7 to 9, the abyss shows you confusing and alarming visions, but you get your answer nonetheless. Maybe you draw a pentacle in the earth and step in while chanting. Maybe you get high and slip into an alternate consciousness, or commune with demonic voices in the woods, or simply black out during history class. Whenever you lose yourself in brooding introspection, that's gazing into the abyss. Before reaching for the dice to gaze into the abyss, ask yourself, what is my character doing? What does the audience see? The answers will be different for every character and often vary each time the move is used. That's great. What's important is to understand what's actually going on in the story. There's an iconic scene that happens over and over again in teen paranormal romances. A young girl finds herself more and more intrigued by a mysterious brooding classmate, but clues keep piling up that there is something unnatural about them, maybe even sinister. When she can no longer dismiss the clues out of hand, when she can no longer feign disinterest, she turns on her computer. The camera watches over her shoulder as she types nervously into the search engine. A flood of images and captions appear before her, and we can see her eyes widen. She knows. She can't deny it any longer. Vampire. That whole scene is gazing into the abyss. Probably just read Pulling Strings and Harm before ending for today. Pulling strings. When you spend a string on someone, choose one. Tempt them to do what you want. Give them a condition. Add 1 to your roll against them, or add 1 to the harm you deal them. When you tempt another player's character, it counts as offering them an experience point if they do what you want. When you tempt one of the MC's characters, the MC will tell you what sort of bribe, threat, or coaxing it will take that character to do what you want right now. The first two options on that list are your proverbial carrot and stick. You can tempt them to do what you want, offering incentives for bending to your will, or you can punish the people who have wronged you or let you down, generating nasty rumors about them or otherwise using your leverage to mess with their social standing. When you tempt a character to do what you want, if it's not something they can reasonably do in that scene, simply agreeing to do it counts. Whether they follow through on that agreement is up to them. The character doesn't need to be present for you to give them a condition. Talking behind somebody's back is a tried and true method for working out your resentment and bitterness. Then it gives up a specific example from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Seems a bit of a harsh way to phrase it, but yeah. Harm. When characters get hurt, they take harm. Harm is tracked on the character's sheet by filling in those dagger-like triangles in pencil. Your character dies when all four harm are filled in. The MC's characters can take whatever amount of harm seems appropriate. Maybe the dorky classmate gets hospitalized or killed at 2 harm. Maybe the MC's werewolf biker Kingpin can take 5 harm and stay on his feet. If you hurt someone, what's that Red Velvet song? Anyways, the one where they're pushing her down stairs in a hospital bed out into a road. I think that'd at least be 3 harm. 2 harm is enough to require medical treatment. It'll have the cops at your door if it's reported. If it's worse than all that, it's 3 harm. Running someone over at full speed in your dad's car is probably 3 harm. When was this printed? I mean, I guess technically, I don't know. I haven't seen a station wagon in years and years. Maybe it's different in Canada. Harm can be amplified in a few ways. Certain skin moves and by expending a string. Alright, so when we pick back up tomorrow, we'll find out how we can recover from all that harm we just took. I will be back on tonight. I will not be continuing inversions. I looked up, when I was reading Game Wizards, they had brought up at one point a certain, I guess, infamous module that had to be pulled from shelves during the height of the panic. And so I kind of want to examine that and see how it is actually. So that should be interesting, and hopefully it doesn't actually have anything against TOS in it, but we'll find that out later tonight.